The story of Dune, as originally written by Frank Herbert, is one of the single greatest novels I've ever read in any genre, not just science fiction. While the novel Dune is a tightly woven, cohesive tale of political intrigue and universe building, can the same be said for Denis Villeneuve's 2021 film adaptation of Dune? Already you may have heard the sentiment that this is an incredible, if not masterful Part 1, yet it still feels incomplete and ends abruptly, or that it feels as if the whole movie is essentially a long Act 1 of the story. Initially, I found myself agreeing with these opinions. However, after rewatching the film and pondering it further, I now disagree that this is an incomplete film that does not work as a standalone motion picture. The movie absolutely has a 3-act structure, though the second and third act can be difficult to discern upon first viewing. I think that the major issues surrounding the film are that it was marketed as a complete adaptation, not simply a Part 1, as well as the fact that many viewers are likely a bit desensitized these days in terms of action set pieces, as many modern movies seem to have an obligatory large-scale battle or conflict, which isn't a feature of this film, at least not an over-the-top flashy final fight. Dune Part 1 has similarities to Infinity War from the MCU, the primary one being that the antagonist is successful in both films. In Infinity War, Thanos achieves his goal of collecting the Infinity Stones and culling half of the life in the universe. In Dune, the Baron Harkonnen's plan of wiping out the House Atreides, in particular, succeeding in killing Leto and reclaiming Arrakis. The Baron and Thanos are also similar in that they are both calculating, intelligent psychopaths who tread their words and actions carefully, and are pursuing goals not all around them can comprehend. Both films end with the all but certain defeat of the protagonists, with many dying, ultimately permanently changing the primary characters who are left alive moving forward. However, Dune does have a sliver of hope at the climax, whereas Infinity War's climax is quite bleak in contrast. While there are likely other similarities of note, I mention these as films in which the antagonists are successful and victorious are uncommon and exceedingly bold, as human instinct tends to prefer good triumphing over evil, and it elates me that this ambitious film is getting a Part 2, as Denis Villeneuve did a commendable job adapting this first half of the novel. While the film may feel as though it ends abruptly, it ends at a very pivotal point in the story, at the halfway point of the novel. The novel is split into 2 sections, split by a time jump following Duke Leto's death and Paul's exodus into the desert. And while not explicitly stated, Paul killing Jameis is when he awakens as Muad'Dib, the future leader of the Fremen, who will lead them on a jihad across the known universe. Not only would a complete adaptation be far too long for a single film, considering how long this first half was, and yet this film still did a masterful job at informing the audience of the lore, history, and politics of the Dune universe, save for a few things. Nonetheless, this film feels as though it's appropriate length for the first half of the story, separated into 3 acts. The first act is the introduction and setup phase, in which the characters and audience learn about Arrakis before arriving on the planet. In the first act, on Caladan, the rivalry between the Atreides and Harkonnens is established, and Paul receives his call to action, both in his call to Arrakis as well as his awakening from the Bene Gesserit. Once they arrive on Arrakis, Act 2 begins, in which the Atreides settle into the planet, meet the Fremen, experience the cruelty of the planet and its worms, and of course, inevitably be betrayed from within and bested by the Harkonnens, which is greatly foreshadowed through the first 2 acts. In particular, the House Atreides, ruled as it is by Duke Leto, is foreshadowed to fall, as demonstrated by Leto's scene with his father's gravestone engraved with an image of a man dying while fighting a bull. If you had not yet made the connection, the Harkonnens are the bulls of this story, made quite literal and evident when you learn that Harkonnen is derived from the Swedish word harka, which, you guessed it, means bull. This explains the plethora and increasing bull imagery and references throughout the first 2 acts, signaling Leto will meet a similar fate to his own father, dying at the hands of a bull he believed he could vanquish. Leto's death and Paul and Jessica's journey into the desert marks the end of the second act and heralding in the third act, in which Paul seeks out the Fremen to fulfill his role as their Lisan al-Gaib, and hopefully cultivate enough desert power to defeat the bull his father could not. As I mentioned earlier, there is no massive action CGI climactic battle, so in terms of superhero movies, it would feel as though this film ends abruptly in comparison to Marvel and DC movies. This film didn't need a giant battle scene to end the film, as Dune is about far more than action, and the film still ends on a highly significant point in the story, as Paul takes the life of another for the first time. Ending the film at the ending of the first section of the novel achieves the same goal that the novel does by that point, which is permanently changing Paul and effectively transforming him into Muad'Dib, savior and leader of the fiercest people in the universe. The story of Dune takes place in a fantastical futuristic setting, yet it is highly focused on Paul's narrative in particular, thus why it's imperative for this film to have ended at the point of the story it did, as it provides development and a character arc for Paul, reminding viewers Paul is in the spotlight of this galactic feud, and that he has officially started his quest to unite the Fremen and defeat the Baron. The final act may be a bit slower action-wise than the second act, however, it's quite faithful to the conclusion of the part 1 of the novel, at the heart of which is Paul's transformation from a duke's son into a powerful leader that drifts into despotism. While I have a few gripes with some aspects of the way the story was adapted, it's still a much more complete film than many are suggesting. The climax isn't all that sudden when considering prior events in the film, or when considering the film lets you know it's part 1 of 2. This film wasn't going to end with a massive sci-fi battle, it was always going to end with Paul's transformation that could subsequently be followed upon in the sequel, by showing Paul's evolved character over several years. The film's climax entices the viewer by planting the seed that this is only the beginning of Paul's journey to rebuilding House Atreides. The end of the movie marks the end of Paul's story, more accurately, and the beginning of Muad'Dib's story, one that will involve much more bloodshed. Props to Denis Villeneuve for crafting such an amazingly faithful adaptation to a beloved science fiction property that had yet to be done in a manner most fans could appreciate. We might just be living in the best timeline.